Is it possible that the CIA inadvertently taught the Iranian people exactly how to overthrow a regime?
In 1953, the CIA executed Operation Ajax to crush Iranian democracy and install a monarch. But 70 years later, the agency's own handbook for psychological warfare has been hijacked by the streets of Tehran. The tactics that defined the Cold War never went away. They just changed hands. Witness how history's most famous coup provided the ultimate blueprint for today's revolution. Discover how the secret blueprints for subversion once used by spies are now the primary weapons for modern Iranian resistance. This is the story of Operation Ajax, the 4 days in August 1953 that ended Iran's brief experiment with secular democracy and set the fuse for the 1979 Islamic Revolution. It is a tale of two coups, one that failed miserably and one that succeeded violently. It explains how a single covert operation shifted the center of gravity in the Middle East from London to Washington and taught a generation of Iranians to distrust the West. To understand the coup, you must understand the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, AIOC, now known as BP. By 1951, the AIOC controlled Iran's massive oil reserves. The terms were stark. The British government earned more in taxes from the company than Iran earned in royalties. For Iranians, the refinery at Abadan, the world's largest, was a symbol of colonial humiliation. Iranian workers lived in slums without running water, while British administrators lived in manicured, air-conditioned enclaves. Enter Mohammad Mosaddegh, an elderly, aristocratic lawyer with a tendency to weep during speeches and conduct business from his bedside. He was nevertheless a fierce nationalist. In 1951, he was democratically elected prime minister on a single promise: nationalize the oil. He did exactly that. The British were expelled, and the Iranian parliament voted to take control of the oil industry. Great Britain, shattered by WW2 and reliant on Iranian oil revenue, panicked. They responded with a naval blockade. The Royal Navy blockaded the Persian Gulf, preventing Iran from selling a single drop of oil. Economic warfare. They froze Iranian assets, driving the economy into bankruptcy. The British initially approached U.S. President Harry Truman for help overthrowing Mossadegh. But Truman refused, seeing Mossadegh as a legitimate nationalist, not a communist. Everything changed in 1953 with the election of Dwight D. Eisenhower. The British intelligence agency, MI6, changed their pitch. They told the new American administration that Mossadegh was weak and that his instability would hand Iran and its oil to the Soviet Union. In the heat of the Cold War, this argument won. Eisenhower greenlit the operation. The plan was a joint venture between MI6, Operation Boot, and the CIA, Operation Ajax. The architect, Kermit Kim Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt and a senior CIA officer, slipped into Iran to run the show from the basement of a safe house. The weapon, a suitcase containing $1 million in cash, roughly $11 million today. Propaganda. The CIA bribed Iranian newspapers to print vicious lies about Mossadegh, labeling him a communist atheist and a Jew to alienate religious conservatives. The thugs. They hired street gangs and muscular Zorkhane traditional Persian gym giants to stage violent riots, posing as communists to terrify the public. The military. They bribed key generals to arrest Mossadegh. The Shah, needed the young, insecure monarch, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, to sign two royal decrees, farmans, one dismissing Mosaddegh and one appointing General Fazlollah Zahedi, a Nazi sympathizer whom the British had previously arrested during World War II, as the new Prime Minister. August 15, the failure. The coup was scheduled for the night of August 15. It was a disaster. Mosaddegh had been tipped off, likely by the two-day Communist Party. When the Shah's Imperial Guard arrived at Mossadegh's home to arrest him, they were arrested instead. Panic ensued. The Shah fled the country, flying his Beechcraft plane first to Baghdad and then to Rome. Washington sent a telegram to Roosevelt. Operation failed. Get out of Iran immediately. August 16 to 18. The chaos. Roosevelt ignored the order. He went rogue. He knew the Iranians were confused. Mosaddegh, thinking he had won, grew complacent and ordered his supporters off the streets to restore order. Roosevelt seized the vacuum. He paid mobsters to flood the streets, chanting, "Long live the Shah," and "Death to Mosaddegh." They burned newspaper offices and attacked symbols of the government. August 19th, the victory. On the morning of August 19th, the tide turned. Pro-Shah tank units, bribed by the CIA, left their barracks. A massive crowd, fueled by CIA dollars and led by retired military officers, marched on Mossadegh's residence at 109 Cox Street. For 9 hours, a tank battle raged outside the Prime Minister's house. Mosaddegh, besieged and outgunned, eventually fled over his garden wall in pajamas. By sundown, General Zahedi was broadcasting victory from the radio station. Mosaddegh surrendered the next day. He was tried for treason, spent 3 years in solitary confinement, and lived the rest of his life under house arrest in his ancestral village, dying in 1967. The Shah. He returned from Rome, reclaiming the peacock throne. He told Roosevelt, "I owe my throne to God, my people, my army, and to you." The oil. The nationalization was effectively reversed. A new consortium was created. The British lost their monopoly. But Western companies, including American ones for the first time, regained control of 50% of the oil. The success of 1953 was a poisoned chalice for the West. The death of Iranian democracy. It ended the only period of secular parliamentary democracy in Iranian history. The Shah became increasingly autocratic, relying on his brutal secret police, SAVAK, trained by the CIA and Mossad to crush dissent. The 1979 revolution. By destroying the secular nationalist opposition, Mosaddegh. The U.S. left religious fundamentalism as the only viable outlet for dissent. When the Shah fell in 1979, the vacuum was filled not by Democrats, but by Ayatollah Khomeini, who famously referred to the U.S. as the Great Satan, a direct reference to the interference of 1953. The regime change blueprint. The easy success of Operation Ajax convinced Washington that secret coups were a cheap, effective alternative to war. The CIA used the exact same playbook in Guatemala 1954, Congo 1961, and Chile 1973, destabilizing the global South for decades. Lost trust. For the people of the Middle East, 1953 became the permanent evidence that Western rhetoric about democracy was a lie. If a Middle Eastern country voted for a leader the West didn't like, the West would simply remove him. The 1953 coup was a masterpiece of analog subversion. But in the 21st century, the basement in Tehran has been replaced by server farms and encrypted satellites. The struggle for Iran is no longer fought just for the radio station, but for the bandwidth itself. In the 1950s, black propaganda meant CIA-funded newspapers printing fake editorials.
Today, it's deepfakes and bot farms.
The shift. Physical flyers were easily seized. Viral videos are immutable once they hit the global cloud.
Digital deception. State actors now use sock puppet accounts that mimic protesters to spread defeatism or lure activists into traps.
Mirroring the 1953 tactic of hired thugs posing as communists to alienate the religious middle class.
Modern movements have moved from a pyramid leadership, like Mossadegh's party, to a starfish model.
Mesh networks, when the state pulls the internet kill switch.
Protesters utilize Bluetooth-based mesh networks like BridgeFi or offline toolkits to communicate locally without a central server.
Bypassing blackouts. The narrative is no longer controlled by a single state broadcaster. Even during total blackouts, footage is smuggled out via digital caravans. USB drives moved across borders.
Or uploaded via clandestine Starlink terminals. In 1953, Kermit Roosevelt needed hours to mobilize a mob from the bazaar. Today, it happens in seconds.
The 1953 model relied on static, high-density crowds that were vulnerable to tank fire.
The flash mob. Modern protesters use be-water tactics.
By the time security forces, Basij, arrive, the crowd has evaporated, only to reform 2 blocks away. Encrypted telegram channels coordinate dozens of simultaneous small-scale protests across a city.
This uses speed to turn the state's massive size into a liability.
Ironically, the current Iranian establishment, which rose to power decrying the 1953 coup,
now uses the exact same tactics to stay in power.
Counter-information, just as the CIA paid mobs to chant, "Long live the Shah."
The state now organizes counter-protests, busing in supporters to create a visual illusion of a divided public for international cameras. Character assassination. Modern state media uses digital Ajax to frame activists as agents of foreign intelligence, ironically the same foreign agent label used against Mosaddegh.
The front line of the revolution is the digital bypass.
VPNs and shadow socks. Iran is one of the world's largest markets for VPNs. It is a constant cycle. The government blocks a protocol, and developers, often in the diaspora, release a new hole in the firewall within hours. Blockchain integrity. Activists are beginning to use blockchain to archive evidence of human rights abuses. Because a blockchain is decentralized, the state cannot delete the history of a protest or the identity of a fallen comrade.
In 1953, an Iranian in Los Angeles was silent. In 2026, they are a strategic asset.
Amplification, when local voices are throttled.
The diaspora acts as a global relay station. They translate slogans, verify footage, and lobby foreign governments,
ensuring that a local arrest in Isfahan becomes a global headline in London or DC within the hour.
Tech corridors. Tech-savvy Iranians abroad develop and fund the very tools, VPNs, proxies, that keep the local population connected. The 1953 playbook was about a foreign power acting upon a passive population. The 2026 reality is the opposite. This generation views resistance as a sovereign national right, not a foreign import. By moving the struggle from the physical town square to the digital meta-square, they have stripped the state of its most effective tool, the ability to make a movement invisible.
The coup of 1953 was a secret. The revolution of the digital age is being live-streamed.